having us here and lending your time in your busy Sundays for this interview. So I'm just gonna give a small intro of yourself and gonna let you know what we are doing in this interview and why is this so important for us. So we are so delighted to have you, Mr. Ram Vishwanath, as an operation risk manager in Bendigo Bank and as well as a technical consultant in PwC in your previous experience. Like you are a perfect fit for us for this interview. Our course on consultancy and stakeholder management, we aim to understand the real world scenarios in the IT related technical fields of how the stakeholder practices are, like what are the professional managers do, how the consultant talk to people, and how are these challenges and the real-time scenarios. So again, thank you so much. And this session is going to be recorded for our assignment as well. And we're going to ask you a set of questions. It's going to be like more kind of conversational than being an interview typical one. Yeah. So let's jump on to the interview. And Sarah, we have the beautiful team over here, and myself, Rashwant, and Saraf, Takshila, Jaichan, and Farhan. Yeah, now we'll just start with the interview.
Sure, please go ahead, guys.
Yep. So first, I just want to know about your role and the organization. Like, what exactly you do at Bendigo Bank at Late and how the operational risk evolves around the technology. And like, can you just share us how the day looks like?
Well, sure, more certainly than not. See, I've been working in a financial institution, which is a bank, obviously. So, given that in a bank, we have a lot of applications. So, in those applications, we have, also, layers for such as network, infrastructure, and all that stuff. So, on a day-to-day basis, we have to monitor risk. Risk in the sense it could be, potentially, like for example, as small as access control to something as big as probably let's say hacking or in the sense let's viruses or ransomware or something like that. But let's talk from a day-to-day perspective. What we do is we monitor changes across applications because we have a lot of systems. In those systems we do patch updates, we do a lot of changes to upgrade the systems itself. So we understand what sort of risks that new systems might bring, and we do a risk control self assessment of these uh, applications, and then we sort of give a report saying that okay, this application is good to go and it can be upgraded to the next stage. That's one thing. The second thing that we do is more or less engage with a lot of stakeholders. Let's say that all these applications that we have will have multiple different stakeholders. So these stakeholders will be engaging with us constantly. It would be a back and forth conversation. We might disagree and say that we have certain compliance, we have a certain standard that we must follow as a bank. And while we are following those standards, we should always ensure that we are under the compliance. If not, we have heavy fines and also penalties from the government. So that we have conversation with the stakeholders, trying to make them understand that everything should be according to the book. And this can be challenging sometimes because you see these are very massive applications and we are dealing with a lot of financial data. So while we are dealing with those side of data, we have to always keep in mind that what can be acceptable, and if there is sort of a risk, we call this as residual risk. So sometimes we might have to take that residual risk on our part and move on. So this is the sort of the day-to-day job that we do. And if you have any other questions following this, you can probably ask me on that.
Yeah, sure. Like looking forward, like as you have described, like what you do in Bendigo Bank, we just wanted to recap your times in PwC as well. Like as a consultant, how did you have this consulting environment approach you? Like how did you after your uni and the stuff, like when you step into PwC as a graduate or technical consultant, how you uh, meet the expectation of the clients and stuff?
So, see, if we talk about the time at PwC, right? PwC is more or less like a learning curve. What they did was give a lot of consultants the platform of what really the risk or the technology space as this means. So, at that point of time, our contact with stakeholders or engaging with clients was not as much as compared to what I do currently. So at that point of time, what happens more or less is that we have a set expectations. PwC is an audit firm, and we do IT audits for them. That's it. So in that perspective, we know what is required of us. We just get the evidences from these clients. We assess if those evidences meet the certain audit measures. Like for example, like I mentioned, we have something called controls. These controls are basically set to ensure that larger risks are mitigated or transferred to another form of risk. So in adding to that perspective, we have to just understand that what really happens, and then we get guidance from our seniors or superiors trying to tell us that this is what happens within that. And also, one other thing that we do in consulting firms like this is that we have a strict timeline, a strict budget. So within that strict timeline and the budget, we have to work. And while working on that, we have to deliver reports accurately and efficiently, because these two words are very key in a consulting firm. Because the report that we present shows whether the company is doing the right thing or not. So that's what is expected from a consulting firm.
Oh, that sounds so like engaging with everyone, like back to back, and making sure all the stuff are in there. That's great. So, as your previous experience and all this stuff, and to the current world, which skills or the mindsets do you think the most important for this IT professionals today? And like, why, while it comes while managing the both risk and the relationship, how do you like personally keep these very good and sharp?
So see, no matter what we learn, right? IT, as talk to a lot of people, especially graduates and stuff, I tell them that it's a very always a learning field. What we need to do is upgrade ourselves every time. Even right now, I'm currently studying for something called the CISSP, which is like the information security certificate that I'm currently doing, because you have to always keep on top. And you see, currently in my bank, financial institution, right? We have to follow APRA standards. If you guys Google APRA standards after you get some time, you can get a lot more knowledge around that. So banks have to follow these APRA standards, and these APRA standards are updated every 2 to 3 years, uh, so that when new risks arise. Like for example, recently the AI risks have increased so exponentially that we have to be compliant. We have to ensure that our customers, our data, everything is protected accordingly. So to stay strong, we have to always keep learning. You have to have the hunger and also the patience to learn and question everything, guys. That's what I would say. If you think that you don't understand something, don't feel it's a stupid question. Please ask, and then people will be always there to help you out and learn more. That's how you keep sharp in the IT sector.
That's great. That's great. That's a key takeaway for us. So now I pass on to the mic to Takshila. My team member will ask you the next set of questions for you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Yes. Thanks, Rashwan. So, hi Ram. I just have a couple of questions for you about identifying stakeholders and mapping your stakeholders. So first off, I'd like to know across your career, who have been your key stakeholders, and usually how do you identify them and prioritize them in your projects?
Hi, Takshila. So there's nothing in the sorts where you say that someone is a key stakeholder or not. It changes every single time. You see, when we talk about stakeholders, right, we have to first understand what is the application or what is the process that we are dealing with. Sometimes what we do as risk consultants or technology consultants is to try to find gaps, understand why we are changing something or why we are upgrading something or why we need something in place, like for example some technology or some application or some kind of a security. Why do we need that? So while we are understanding that, we'll know that there are so many different elements attached to it. Like for example, something is not a straightforward process. If we take a payroll, for example, right? So it's not just the payroll team that's involved in it. There's also the back-end team of finance. There's a back-end team for crime. There's a back-end team for applications and everything. So in that perspective, we should know what is the levels of those stakeholders are. Like for example, if we talk about this payroll process that I mentioned, right? So in that payroll process, we might need to delegate the stakeholders from level 0 to level 10. But in the application side of that same process, probably we'll only need to go to level 2 or level 3. So just to understand that, we should know that how integrated all these elements are within that process. So it keeps on changing. And sometimes also there will be hidden stakeholders. Like for example, the CISO can be a hidden stakeholder because he's so high up, he doesn't need update on everything, but he needs sort of informations and certain elements that needs to be addressed properly to him. So that's what is very essential. And if you start doing projects right as you go up your career, you will easily get it easily, but it's a learning curve, to be honest.
Okay, sure, I see. So, I guess it's a muscle that needs to be like trained over time. When you gain experience, you
Yes.
learn how to do it. But because you said there's like levels to mapping these stakeholders, is there any kind of framework that you follow? Um,
I wouldn't say it's a framework. I would just say communicate. You see, as I told you, everything comes back to that one single point where I said no question is a stupid question. So when you're dealing with stakeholders, right, you should always ask whether this is the right person to talk. Because as I said in the same payroll process, because we have started that example, there's also a business side and the technology side. So the business people would not be actually the correct people to talk to with relevance to technology. So to identify that, you should just communicate. You should sort of address and engage with them to know how much is their understanding and whether this is the right person to deliver what you need to deliver, right? So there's no such sort of framework. That's what I would say. But also, what I can suggest probably an easier way to understand is sort of I write down who are the critical stakeholders that might be involved, and I probably cancel them out after every conversation whether this is the right person or not. That is a very simple thing that I do till now, and it has been very efficient for me.
oh, good. Thank you so much. So, I just have one last question.
No worries, go for
Um,
it.
sure. So, can you please share a specific scenario where effective stakeholder identification it sort of directly contributed to the project success, or it helped you avoid a very significant challenge, so that it's like illustrated for all of us here?
Okay, I can tell you a very recent scenario that happened in my workplace, right? So we do control validations. So control validations is basically nothing but, as I told you, we have all critical applications, and within those applications we have access controls, security controls and all that stuff. Like for example, one of these third party access controls, we had a very crucial documentation missing. So easier, especially when we do controls testing, we do design effectiveness and operating effectiveness. I hope I'm not going too technical, but just let me brief it out. Design effectiveness basically how this control is designed, and operating effectiveness is to understand whether this control is working as it is intended to. So in this design effectiveness, we found a major gap, something that was not addressed according to the standard. So what we did was first to try to understand if the stakeholder or the owner of that application is doing the process accordingly. We understood that he is, but it's not mentioned how he is doing it in the design effectiveness. So this becomes like a policy or a documentation gap. So to do that, what we did basically is we understand this is the process. So we communicated with the system owner, we communicated with the documentation owner, and also the head of risk for that particular team, and we addressed that this is the sort of the issue, and they immediately understood. Because when it comes to big organizations like this, there's no point that we can take risks, because we act like internal auditors, but there's also external auditors who come and review that work. So this was a very easy communication, and it led for the change to happen right away. So that's just very simple thing. Sometimes there are situations where the budget won't allow certain things to happen, right? So at those points of time, what we do is basically try to find a countermeasure, which is like a temporary solution, but then we address that solution later, which will be taken down in particular notes or Confluence pages so that we can come and address back later. Does that answer your question?
Yep, that was very insightful. Thank you so much. And
No
now I'm
worries.
just passing over to Jashan.
Hi, I'm JJ. I'm going to ask three questions about relationship building and networking. My first question is, what method or strategies have you found most successful in establishing trust and credibility with your stakeholders?
Hi, buddy. So there's no particular mantra for this. I would say be very communicative. Try to be as transparent as possible, because no matter what, you have to give the sense to the opposite person that you're basically trying to help them out and not, to offend them or like point out their mistake or something. So be very clear with that. And because when you start working in organizations like this, you automatically start building a rapport. You don't really, you call them with names, and you probably engage in some socializing event, because all big organizations at least once a month will have some sort of socializing event. And because you're working with these sort of people, try to always engage with them, talk something outside of work. Don't just be gibberish and talk only work kind of things. Do something better. And also, when the work itself comes, be very consistent, precise on what you need. Don't beat around the bush. Just tell them straight on their face, hit it head on, and tell them, well, this is what I'm after. Are you the right person to talk? Because that saves them time. It gives you a good impression as well about yourself, and it also helps the communication to be faster.
Thank you. My next question is, how do you typically navigate or resolve conflicts when stakeholders have opposing interests or, prob- um, sorry.
It's the first thing is to listen.
Mm.
That's what I would say. Whenever there's conversations like this, there's a lot of tough decisions that's been made in organizations like this every single day. So you have to first talk it out, listen to what that opposing person is, because I'll say from my perspective, I am because I'm a risk consultant or risk manager here. I question so many things, because I we act as the line one of defense for the bank, and we have to question why they are operating in such a manner, or why the design is in such a manner or something like that. So I would just first listen to what the opposite person has to say, why uh, something has been done a particular way, and then also facilitate some kind of a compromise or a solution. You see, like I told you before, try to work around something. Probably, they should, like for example, they at the bank we have sometimes, sure, start a short of resourcing, so they might not have much people to act upon. So one person takes overload and he can't probably work on different things efficiently. So if you could facilitate something like that, ask some other team member to jump in or help, who's having less work or probably is on a free time or something like that. So this is how we do that. We should always understand what the opposite person's problem is and try to resolve the solution, rather than accusing them or telling them that they're wrong. That's the first thing that I would say.
Thank you. That's very helpful. My last question is, in your experience, what are the most effective ways to engage stakeholders during a big change, such as, system upgrades or implementing the new technology?
Uh, the most effective way is first that we have to have a clear understanding, like I told you. So we have to have a sort of a mind map first. We should know whether our team or someone else who, like for example, our manager or everyone has a clear vision of what's need to be delivered. We communicate the same to the opposite persons as well. So it's very important where to keep your conversation formal. Sometimes you have to keep your formal conversations informal, and also you have to collaborate. Try to find, let's say if something is uh, difficult to achieve, for example, you have to then sort of understand whether you can break it down into smaller chunks, probably push it a little bit later, to understand whether some things can be implemented now and some things can be implemented later with the level of priorities. So all I would say is we have to always be very practical and precise of what really is needed at all times.
Thank you. Now I'll hand over to my teammate, Sarah.
Hello, Ram. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Saraf. I just have a couple of questions about your personal experience with mainly engaging with your stakeholders in terms of communication and their, let's say, their cultural background, those kind of things. So my first question is, can you provide an example of where you had to engage, like adjust the way you engage with your stakeholders, depending on their cultural background or their personality?
Hi, Sharath. So, as I told you, because I'm obviously from different country, the first of all, understanding the English was a little bit harder. Now my English has improved way too much because I've been here for over 5 years now. But initially, the speed of the way they communicate, or that's very different. So what I used to do is just tell them to repeat. Sometimes I'd be very polite with them to ask them to elaborate what they're meaning. So 90% of the time, everybody is very accommodative of that. And at certain points, when, for example, sometimes I know people who are from Germany, or their accent is way different, and they might not have the correct words to communicate in English. So where they feel a gap or something, I give them those words. So no matter what, it should be accordingly. Let's say that if they need help, I sort of help them out, and if I need help, they sort of help me out. That's the sort of way we communicate. And at certain points as well, we use sign languages, but not anymore. But initially, if that's required, we do that as well. So as long as you feel that the opposite person is welcomed and he feels comfortable around you, I think this shouldn't be a big barrier these days, I would say.
Perfect. That's actually a really good example. Let's move on to the next question. Um, Now, can you describe basically a situation where basically effective communication significantly improved stakeholder engagement, or let's say prevented a misunderstanding? Now, you did mention that whatever way works best, even if it's sign language, um, you'll have to just improvise. But building on that example or anything else, can you give us an example where that worked?
See, well, like for example, when you're communicating, right, like to improve these engagements, what I would say is, like, even right now, because I'm communicating and we are answering questions back and forth or engaging ourselves, you're recording it, right? So this is a very helpful tool. So sometimes if you don't understand, like for example, something that I might have said, you can probably rewind that back, and that's a sort of a way that you can make that engagement even more meaningful. And probably documenting notes, and wherever the stakeholder probably goes off track or something, you can bring them back into line, to understand whether they are probably trying to express something else, but they're not finding the correct words. So you can probably fill in their gaps and stuff, as I mentioned. And also, it's very important to make the opposite person feel that you have the trust in him, well, to give them the essence that what they're communicating is being heard of and heard correctly. So repeating or re-emphasizing what they said, and then asking them whether if I'm getting his idea correctly, always ensures that there's less misunderstandings with the stakeholder.
Right, that's actually a great answer too. So essentially being more involved and listening properly is one of
Yes.
the great ways. Amazing. And the next question is, again, could you give us an example of where you've had to work with different personalities, or let's say people from different cultures, and there has been challenges in basically their engagement, and how did you manage to kind of navigate that successfully?
See, whenever we are communicating, we should respect the opposite person's identity, what he possesses. So whenever you are engaging with them, like I told you again, you have to make them feel comfortable. And if they reciprocate the same, no matter what, whether there's communication barrier, there's any other language barriers or anything, the communication still goes ahead and becomes successful. What I would say is that if you have certain issues within an engage with a stakeholder or something, as I said before, you have to try to understand what his point of view is, and then deliver what your point of view is, and then find a common ground. Because in all these conversations, finding the common ground is the most difficult element. So if you give them the space to express their views, and you are given the space that your views are expressed, then the communication would be successful. And there are points of times where the opposite person is not willing to listen to you. You just tell them that when you are able to listen to me, then I would be able to communicate to you. Or if you find that person is still not communicative, I think a written form of communication is much more effective at this point of situations.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. That answers all my questions. I'll move on to the next person, move on to Farhan.
Hey Ram, I'm Farhan. So I wanted to talk to you about like teams and stakeholder engagement. We're talking about stakeholder engagement throughout the interview now. So as we know that you are an operational risk manager at Bendigo Bank, I suppose that your stakeholders would be your customers or the corporate hierarchy or your teammates. So and also as a consultant at PwC, I would assume the other companies are your stakeholders. So in your experience, like how do teams typically collaborate in managing like stakeholder relationships effectively in an IT consultancy project? Because not everyone is from an IT background, so not everyone knows the terminologies.
Hi, Farhan. So what I would say is that, in typically my banking environment, right? So it's mostly within the internal staff. So we don't collaborate much with the external team unless, like I told you, sometimes we might get our auditors communicating with us, but as the first line of defense, we act as the internal auditors ourselves to audit the bank. So it's mostly internal clients. And because you already have a formal rapport, as I told you, because you're working within the sector and you have, the social events and all that stuff, so it makes the communication way more easier. But back at PwC, what happens is that we have clients. So having those clients, and at my point of time, because it was just after COVID, and not many teams would want us to come to the organization itself to engage. It was mostly virtual like this. So what we used to do initially is that we have a team, and within the team, each person has a clear role or responsibility. Like for example, one would be the senior, the other two people would be the consultant, and probably there will be a manager within the team. So when that role is set, then we just coordinate as a team to understand who asks what, who expresses concerns, and certain point of time where there's something important, the manager would jump in and ask questions. So when the communication is done in such a manner, then the client always feels that we are on top of what is required and what needs to be delivered. So what I would say basically is we have to set expectations correctly and deliver those expectations. That's it.
Okay. So, uh, so I know that you mentioned that communication is one of the tools for like engaging with the stakeholders. But like, could you describe like a collaboration method or tools your teams typically use to support like stakeholder engagement, or any like techniques in the communication or the approach in the communication that you guys take?
See, within the corporate sector, right, and especially in IT, we nowadays use a lot of Teams, Slack, Jira. These are some tools that we use, and sometimes we use, for example, for something very detailed, we use emails. Emails for sure is mainly used for documentation attachments and stuff like that. Nowadays, even Confluence pages are used, but that is more or less like a documentation page, and it leads to what needs to be found and everything. But uh, more or less, Teams has now become the norm, I would say, in the IT sector. If something needs to be resolved in a quick and an efficient manner, we just message the responsible person in Teams, and they usually respond in a very quick time or something like that. If not, and probably that person is on a leave or something, the email is the next best option. And if that's something very sensitive, then what we do is probably do over a Teams call. We record the Teams call as well, and if not, and if the person is working in the same location as you are, also a face-to-face meeting would is rather helpful most of the times. So these are the ways that we sort of engage with the stakeholders, and these are the sort of activities we do on a regular basis.
So I assume the tools have been very like effective in practices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So okay, moving on. So like we know that like an IT institution can never be like run by a single person. So can you share like an example of a challenging stakeholder situation where you guys managed successfully through effective teamwork?
Okay. So as we said, we are part of the line one risk team, right? So we have the general manager of risk on top of us, who sits on the top of the tree. He manages three lines of risks, and I don't want to go much in detail, but I'll just go with my line. So under the general manager, there's the head of risk, which is the head of my team, and then there's a senior manager, and then I'm the manager after that. So this is the sort of the tree that we follow. And there was a one such situation where we had to address a resourcing issue, like I was telling you, when someone was not filling in for a certain type of work, or it was a sort of a control gap or a control failure. So at that point of time, what we did was I found out the gap. I addressed the gap to my senior manager. My senior manager addressed it to the head of risk, and then that went to the general manager. But the communication goes in certain manner that I give a detailed description to my senior manager. My senior manager gives a brief to the head of risk, and the head of risk just gives an information. You see, the information has narrowed down in certain manner. That's because we collaborate as a team, and we dedicate the information according to who needs what and who's going to address that information. Because, for example, the general manager of risk is not going to act upon what is required. He's just going to probably make the final decision. And one of the solutions here was to increase the resourcing at least for a certain period of time until this person comes back from leave or something like that. And so what needs to be done? So his decision is, if he says go ahead, the head of risk is going to say, okay, this needs to, this person has given a go ahead, he's increased the budget, so let's hire a person, and then the senior manager acts accordingly. So something like that. So that was an effective way of chunking down the information from lower to the upper standard, and then the decision is just taken seamlessly and smooth, because what needs to be presented to them is presented accordingly.
Yeah, thank you for such a detailed example. So I will finish up on that. I'll pass my mic to my friend Takshi, who will have the follow-up questions.
Sure.
Yes. Hi again, Ram. So I just have one last question, which is
Sure.
seeking advice. Reflecting on your entire career, what single piece of advice would you give to IT professionals who their aim is to improve and enhance their stakeholder engagement skills?
Mm, First of all, I would definitely say be transparent, right? And I would say be communicative in the sense that you have to address what is required, and if you have to address what is required, you should be very clear on your thoughts of what is needed. And then, as I told you while throughout this conversation, listening is a very, very key tool and a powerful tool. And at some points of time, you have to feel empathetic towards the opposite person and express that you're listening carefully. And also, some at some points of time, silence is a very important thing as well. There are certain times that you should stop speaking, and you should, if you continue keep on speaking, what message you're trying to deliver is misled, or it's not delivered correctly. So if you understand and follow these three key elements, then probably you'll be engaging with every single stakeholder with flying colors.
Thank you so much for all the good pointers. I'll just pass on to Rashwant now to wrap up.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Ram, for having a detailed session of your real world scenarios and examples and your insights. Your insights on empathy, communication, and communicating with stakeholders with a live example of your experience was so insightful. And this will greatly help us to finish our report for this assignment. And I'm so happy to have you here once again, thank you on your Sunday time, spending time with us for so long. Have a great week ahead, and thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys. It was a very fun session. I hope I added some meaning to you guys. And if you use it, probably you will have a wonderful or an easy IT life.
Thank you so
That's
much,
true.
Ron.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
No
so
you.
worries.
much.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good one.
you.
Have a
See ya.
good night.
Good night. Bye.